William Wallace was born in 1270, in the small village of Elderslie in the Renfrewshire region of Scotland. He hailed from a family of lesser nobility, with his father, Sir Malcolm Wallace, being a minor landowner dedicated to defending his land and people. From his childhood, William was surrounded by stories of his country's struggles and the ancient Scottish clans that had resisted invasions and oppressions. As he grew up, the Kingdom of Scotland began to be threatened by a new and ambitious enemy, King Edward I of England. With the death of King Alexander III of Scotland leaving no heir in 1286, a succession dispute arose that destabilized the nation. The English capitalized on this chaos, and seeing the weakened resistance of the Scottish nobles, Edward I began imposing his authority over Scotland, seeking to annex it into his kingdom. As a young man, William witnessed English soldiers spreading across Scottish lands, provoking discontent and resentment among the inhabitants. Scotland, once free and prosperous, now suffered under foreign oppression. It is said that in his youth, Wallace was instructed in both combat and culture as well as religion, developing not only combat skills but also a deep sense of justice and love for freedom. These ideals and values eventually led him to become one of the most emblematic leaders in Scottish history. The turning point in his life came in 1297. After an encounter in Lanark with English soldiers who attempted to arrest him, Wallace escaped and returned at night, taking revenge by killing the English sheriff, William de Heselrigg. This act of reprisal marked the beginning of his life as a rebel. The oppressed and exhausted Scottish people began to see Wallace as a symbol of resistance, and he soon surrounded himself with men willing to follow him. He became a guerrilla leader, leading swift and lethal attacks against English garrisons in Scotland. His tactics surprised the English, who expected to face formal armies, only to encounter a cunning and fierce leader who knew every corner of the Scottish lands and how to use the terrain to his advantage. One of the defining events of his life was the Battle of Stirling Bridge in September 1297. The English, led by the Earl of Surrey, thought crushing Wallace's rebellion would be simple and marched toward Stirling with a well-equipped army. Wallace, aware of the superiority of the English, devised a brilliant strategy. Instead of confronting them directly, he lured the English troops onto the narrow bridge over the River Forth, forcing them to cross in narrow lines. When a significant portion of the English army had crossed, Wallace and his men ambushed the soldiers, trapping them and achieving a resounding victory. The news of the victory at Stirling spread like wildfire throughout Scotland, and Wallace was proclaimed Guardian of Scotland and leader of the resistance. The Battle of Stirling was not only a military triumph, but also a psychological blow to the English. Wallace continued a campaign of raids in northern England, devastating English lands and cities. These incursions kept the enemy occupied and demonstrated that the Scots, under a leader like Wallace, were a formidable force determined to resist to the end. However, things would not always be favorable. In 1298, Wallace faced Edward I himself at the Battle of Falkirk. Wallace's army, though brave, was outmatched by Edward's tactics and resources, which included Welsh archers and heavy cavalry. The defeat at Falkirk was devastating for Scottish morale, and Wallace was forced to resign his position as Guardian of Scotland. Nevertheless, he continued his struggle clandestinely, moving between territories and organizing resistance from the shadows. To gain support, Wallace traveled to Europe in 1299, seeking allies among England's enemies. He met with King Philip IV of France and sought the backing of Pope Boniface VIII. Although he received moral support and sympathy, he failed to obtain the military assistance he hoped for. He returned to Scotland to continue the resistance, but his situation was increasingly precarious. Edward I did not rest until he captured Wallace, and in 1305, he was betrayed by the Scottish nobleman Sir John Menteith, who handed him over to the English. Wallace was taken to London, where he faced a rigged trial in which he was accused of treason and numerous crimes. Wallace defended his position, saying he had never been a subject of Edward I and therefore could not be a traitor. Wallace's execution was brutal. He was condemned to be hanged, drawn, and quartered, with his head placed on London Bridge as a warning to those who might follow his example. His remains were sent to different English cities, with the intention of instilling fear in any other Scots who dreamed of independence. However, far from intimidating his people, Wallace's death inspired further resistance. Years later, the struggle he had begun culminated in Robert the Bruce's victory at Bannockburn, temporarily consolidating Scotland's independence. William Wallace, despite his violent end, became a legend, an immortal symbol of the fight for freedom. His name, deeds, and sacrifice remain etched in the collective memory of Scotland, remembered as a hero who lived and died for his homeland. The Wallace Tower in Stirling and other monuments erected in his honor testify to his impact on the history and spirit of the Scottish people. His life continues to inspire those who believe in freedom and the courage to defend it. Subscribe, like, and keep the notification bell active to stay tuned for the next video.